creep around us. Silent whispers call. In the dark we wander lost within it all. Night air is heavy, breaths that freeze the soul. Echoes in the distance, stories left untold. Whispers of the night, drawing near and tight. Secrets in the shadows, hidden from the light.
Hey there, true believers, and thanks for coming back for another episode of Monstrous, the podcast. And all of the listeners have really been asking for this lady to come back, Miss Aleera Ember. And we finally got her back, and everybody loved her eyewitness accounts with the Dogmen. And Aleera, how have you been doing?
Pretty great right now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure everybody's glad to hear that. And like I said, everybody really enjoyed hearing your eyewitness accounts and your stories with the Dogman and your experiences. And they've just been, uh, hounding me, no pun intended. They've been hounding me to get you back, and I was able to get you back on here, and I really want to go into more of the stories that that we talked about that you were going to tell us as far as the Dogman stuff. So, like always, I'm going to let you start from the beginning, give as much detail as you want to give, and I'm going to go silent. I'm going to sit back here and just let you talk. And every once in a while, I might interject and ask a question for a little bit more details. But other than that, the mic is yours. Tell us what's going on with you.
All right. Well, so some of there's actually some more stories I do have from North Texas. I do have some more stories from South Texas, and now I'm also in Central Texas. So my kids have actually had some stories that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But I'll finish with North Texas. There was some more after the last time we talked, and a lot of people started asking more questions. So I was like, and more. So, in high school, the four that I had talked about previously that I first encountered, a year later, I had encountered them again with a group of friends, and a small group of friends, and I had told them about like what I had seen, and of course they were kind of like, okay, whatever. And we decided, well, I'm just going to show you then. And sure enough, on our little walk up to the pretty much the same spot, it was generally in the same area. I was showing them the trees and stuff like that, the slash marks on the trees, different markings and stuff like that. Eventually they did too also smell that wet dog smell. It became very pungent. And on our way there to the spot, again, it went really, really silent. And I explained to him, like, guys, this is what I had experienced last year. And one of them is more familiar with the woods that we were into as well, but more so on the nature trail and stuff. They didn't really stray too far off the nature trail. So, but they definitely felt the eeriness when it got very, very quiet. And one of the other people in our group, we'll call him A. He pre-gamed before we went on our little journey, so he was kind of falling all over the place when we were getting there and stuff, and getting on everybody's nerves. So when we get there and we start putting up tents and stuff like that and setting up the area, he's falling all over the place. And then he, like, we were already talking about the smell and stuff like that, and I guess he fell down in an area. He said it smelled like pee, but like dog pee. Like, and I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if they did mark their spot there. So we eventually end up having to do the tent for him and stuff like that. And I started explaining more about what I had seen and what had happened to the other two that were part of the group, because they were part of the friend group, but they were more acquaintances and stuff like that. So I filled them in on that experience. So then nighttime starts rolling in, and like the noises would come, like you'd hear bugs and stuff like that. And they would fade in and out, like, and eventually I would say it was about 10 o'clock, because they one of the friends did have a phone, and by 12 o'clock that's when their phone had died. And again, this is back in the early 2000s, so our phones were a little bit different than today. But it was about just before 12, and a couple of them had fallen asleep, and we were just sitting by the fire. And again, that eerie feeling of just being watched, and you couldn't really, it was really hard to tell from what angle, because there was noises and footsteps. And of course, everybody's like, well, there's probably other people here in the woods and stuff like that. And I was just like, I don't know. Guess we'll see, won't we? And A got to see big time. They didn't seem to like him very much. And he was, I guess, if from a dog's perspective, the runt of the pack. And so everybody's like starting to fall asleep and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden A is just like trying to wake people up. I need to go to the bathroom and I don't want to go by myself. And we had flashlights, of course. And finally I was just like, all right, fine, I will go. And we go up up our little path a little ways away from where we had set up our little camp area, and just over a hill. And I turn around and let him do his business, but I heard footsteps really close to us at first, and then they just stopped suddenly. And he's doing his business, and next thing he knows, like, he's going to pull up his pants or whatever, and all of a sudden he is face to face with this thing. And I turn around, because he made some weird like whiny noise, and I was just like, I turn around really quick, and it's just staring at him, and at least a good 2.5 feet away from his face. And I was just like, we need to go. And it swiped at him, and it did scratch his shirt. He got minor scratches on him and stuff. And I yanked him back by his hood, and we kind of tumbled back and started running towards our camp. And it wasn't very far, but we got back into the light of the campfire. And he really couldn't put into words like what he had seen. And I was explaining to him that is exactly what I had seen. And I said there's 4 of them, and it was one of the 4. It was one of the biggest one that was there. And he did not, just from that alone, I could tell he did not like A at all. We get back to the camp though, and everybody's awake now, and he starts freaking out, and he was, like I said, it was minor scratches and stuff like that, but it didn't chase after us. But that's when like all 4, you could hear all 4 start walking around in all different directions now. And again, on the outside of our camp, just out past the light, where the light would reach and stuff like that. And eventually everybody did see an outline of these creatures. And of course, everybody's like, what the fuck? And I said, I told you guys, I'm not fucking crazy, you know? And I told them what I did the last time. They didn't bother me. They're just more curious. But because they had already, one had lashed out at A, I was kind of on the fence about him a little bit and wasn't sure. So eventually, somehow, they all, like, everybody starts going to sleep, and A is apparently still drinking. And I mean, I guess I could kind of understand after what happened. I'd want my nerves to calm a little bit too, but he's laying down, and I hear them like getting very, very close, and the fire's actually dying at this point. And at one point, one of them like yanks his foot and like gives him a really big jolt. And he wakes up, he starts screaming, everybody wakes up, and like he panics for a little bit, and so he moves in closer. We all move in kind of closer and stuff. And we ended up having to like set the fire up a little bit bigger. And then throughout the night, I think it was probably maybe 3 o'clock in the morning or so. Again, the phone was dead, so I'm just guesstimating there. We eventually did fall back asleep and stuff, but they kept messing with his stuff. Like they took all of his stuff out of his bag and like tossed it everywhere. They peed on his stuff. And they peed on the end of his sleeping bag by his feet. They were really messing with him. And I guess at some point one of them had like scratched his head, because he didn't have a scratch from before, because it was just across his chest when he was face to face with one. But sometime during the night, his head was faced outwards towards the circle, and they had to have scratched him and stuff like that. But like I said, he had been drinking, so probably didn't wake up after a while during all the commotion. I'm like, we didn't hear, the rest of us didn't hear any of the commotion of them going through his stuff or anything like that. And they didn't touch anybody else's stuff. So they just really didn't like A.
So why do you think that they didn't care for him?
Ironically, he ended up not being a very good friend to a lot of people. And on top of it, like he was like very, very drunk when he was around us. You know how animals can tell when somebody is good generally. He
Mhm.
turned out not to be so great. And they probably picked that up miles away. And that's my best guess. And so they
Now,
were picking on him.
now you mentioned whenever you took them out there, you showed them the scratch marks on the trees. Now, if anybody listened to the first episode with you, then they're going to know what you're talking about. Could you kind of refresh everybody's memory about what that means with the scratch marks on the trees?
Right. So the in certain directions, basically the direction that we were in, the less markings on the tree, like they didn't really go over in that area too much. Um, but they are basically like crisscross or like crosshatch marks. They're about 10 feet up on the tree, and the closer they are, the closer you are getting to their territory. But there was only 3 main trees, and they were very spread out where we were at. And I did tell them that there was another trail. This is before I found the third trail, where I found a bunch of these like really big dens that they look like stick houses at the top, but they were covering like a burrow that was pretty deep. Um, so they didn't get to see any of that. And the A had actually knew the person who had assaulted me, and somehow it his cousin found he had told his cousin about it, and his cousin was having eventually so Ingleside, or I'm sorry, Denton at the time only had 3 main high schools. They had a 4th, but it's not a part of the story. So the cousin went to Ryan High School, which was like on a whole different side of Denton. But there is a good section of woods over there. And that's actually where I did a lot of work too, on some houses and stuff like that. Where another one of the stories I was talking about in the the other episode, that's in that area. And so the cousin eventually hears about this and stuff, and there's like a lover's lane out that way, and it's butted. He had a habit of like being really shitty to people, and they kind of did. They had a way of screwing people over all the time, and so they kind of did it together, and they were just generally not good people. And the cousin, I remember he really rubbed me the wrong way, and he all of a sudden he started having at first it started off with nightmares of these creatures coming and chasing him and tearing him apart and stuff like that. And then he swore up and down whenever he was driving the back roads and stuff that he would see them. And A gets a hold of me and is like, hey, my cousin is having some issues here. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a him problem. And he's like, no, he's seeing those things. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. You should have been nicer. But um, eventually, I go we just to go see, just to see if I see anything. These ones were different, and there was a large group of them, but they never came close to me. But you know how a pack of wolves, they will circle an area that you're in, and they'll make a lot of noise, and again, the markings were all the same over there too. The closer you were to their territory and stuff, there were more trees with more of these markings and stuff. And the Lover's Lane was like on the very edge of the woods and stuff, so it wasn't so super close to their territory, but if you were to go into the woods far enough, you'd be entering their territory. And these ones were more territorial than the ones over on my side of town. And some of them were a lot larger, even anywhere between 10 and 12 feet. And they moved, the larger ones seemed to move a whole lot quicker. And I don't know, it was more pungent over there too when it came to that wet dog smell. There was also another creek over there. I don't remember what the creek is called, but I know there is a creek that runs through there in the middle of those woods, and that is a lot closer to their territory. And like most animals, they need a good water source. Well, we go into the woods, and there's like this opening. So, like, again, Denton's like this giant hilly area. And in the woods, like this area where we're at, where it's open, it dips down. And like, honestly, I feel like this would be a den, but it was really hard to tell at the time. We end up in that area, and again, we're hearing all the noises, but we're not seeing anything. And this is also during the day, late in the later part of the day, but it's still light out and stuff. And I'm hearing them, and every now and then you'll hear cackles. And whenever he would speak, it's like it would piss them off, because then you'd hear growling, you'd hear snapping, like when dogs clack their teeth and stuff, like you were hearing that. And eventually he got too scared, and it took several attempts to go through there. Eventually, though, it's after, I think, the third or fourth attempt of going in there, he finally he stayed long enough. And I don't know, my best advice to him was, talk to them. That's the only thing I could think of, was talk to them. And eventually, like, he said his piece, and it's like the noise died down. Like, he, I guess, genuinely meant it, instead of just out of fear. And over time, like, the nightmares and the sightings that he was seeing on his end, it was really starting to wear on him mentally. And basically, he just went in there asking for forgiveness and stuff like that, and it seemed to work. He didn't see them nearly as often. It's kind of like they kept an eye on him, but he stopped doing less shitty things. Wasn't great, but better than he was before. And eventually, they started to leave him alone. But again, they never really messed with me. They did get a little bit close to me on the second time that we went out there. I was ahead on the trail, and one ran across the trail and stopped for a minute, and it was one of the larger ones. This one had to have been well over 10, maybe 11 feet. And it jumped up into the tree, and it went to the darker side of the canopy of the tree. So at some point I really couldn't see it. But I just remember when it stopped and looked at me, it looked me dead in the eyes. And at that point, he was catching up, and he looks up just as it jumps into the tree. But that moment, a split moment where we were looking each other in the eyes, there was an instant understanding, I was not the problem. So we ended up it was the third or fourth time when we had come back. That's when everything was okay. But it seemed to be, they were very heavy on watching us. And again, they just didn't seem to like him very much. But yeah, as far as he goes, I hope he's all right. And then there was another time. So going back to the 4 that I had met. Now, this is where it really gets interesting, because I remember seeing 4 people. So there's downtown Denton, and there was a hookah lounge that we would go to frequently, called Kush. Really cool place. Don't know if it's still open, but we would go to this hookah lounge and stuff. And again, the eyes to these creatures were so very distinct. The female had these very vibrant orange eyes, and there we go. One of the smaller males, he had these very, really icy blue eyes. And then the middle, I guess the middle one, he had an ocean blue eyes. And then the other one just had these very, very distinct green eyes. And at this hookah lounge, my friends and I, we get our seat, and there's this group of 4 across the room from us, and they're staring in our direction. And they're over by the bathrooms, and eventually I did need to use the bathroom. And but the whole time we were there, they kept staring at us. And eventually I get up to go to the bathroom, and I'm trying to get one of my friends to go with me, but nobody's budging. So I have to walk past these people, and instantly the female, she stood up and she said, Aleera. Now, Aleera is actually my soul name. My government name is Tara. And she knew me by both names. And she looked me dead in the eye, and those were the same beautiful, vibrant orange eyes that I had seen that night. And she shook my hand. Now, here's another thing that really put my hairs on end. When I shook her hand, I remember what her hand felt like. These people were very, very familiar to me, but I didn't know any of them. And when she shook my hand, I knew that felt so familiar. And then he was okay. So the younger one, which is the one that had the very, very, like bright blue eyes. He was closer to age. Because at this point I was 18. So he had to been like 19 or 20. We're close in age. And he shook my hand, and I remember being so stunned. And then like the fourth one across from them, now he's the one with the very vibrant green eyes. He stood up and he goes, "It's nice to finally meet you again." And I freaked out at that point. I ran to the bathroom, and I'm not gonna lie, I did have a panic attack because I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then I come out and they're gone. And like I felt like I was in this like weird Twilight Zone kind of dream or something. And that's what like it really threw me off. And then it in a way it kind of reminds me of when this show came out. I don't know why I was so attached to it, but I really got attached to the show. But it's called The Order, and they only had like 2 seasons on Netflix, but literally there's 4 werewolves in that show and stuff like that. And it reminded me of that a little bit when meeting these 4 people and those 4 creatures, because there was just a very striking similarity between those instances. And it was just really, really interesting to me. And then there was another encounter so the last time we talked, I had talked about another creature. Like he looked older. He definitely looked a lot older. Almost like an elder. He was more gray. And he had that he had a scar going across his thigh. And there was a time where I feel like I met this one again as well. So the officer that initially he wasn't the one who took my statement, but he was there present when I was talking to a detective on not one occasion, but 2 occasions. And the second occasion was actually a paranormal thing that turned out to be really cool. That's a whole nother story. Not cool, like it's sad, but anyways, the first time I talked to this detective, it was about the sexual assault, and it obviously didn't go anywhere. Well, it seemed, I remember the look on this guy's face, and he seemed really, really upset with this detective. He didn't say nothing the entire time, but eventually I did see this guy out of uniform, and it was at the water park, and he was there with his daughter. And wildly enough, I knew his daughter too. And she didn't go to our school, but I was in ROTC, and she was also in ROTC. So a few of our games and stuff like that, I'd seen her at some of these games. He was in his swim trunks though, and he had that same scar going across his thigh. And again, it was the eyes that I was just like, wow. And I'm not one to believe in coincidences. Like, this was this was very, very familiar to me. And it almost kind of makes a lot of sense to me in a way, because this older creature was the one in my third encounter from the last time we talked, my third encounter that I had talked about, where there was a group of people out in the field and stuff, and it looked like they were hunting. I'm not sure if it was hunting season, but it was around this time of the year. And of course, they had guns and stuff like that, and a big, huge them, because this was actually very, very close to all those dens and stuff. And that older creature had knocked me down, and then I had tried to get up to get away, but I wasn't moving fast enough, and there was heavy footsteps coming in our direction, and that's when he grabbed me by my hood, and he was dragging me towards this like marshy area. There was this this heavy, thick, dense, marshy area, and it stunk over there. And there's this one tree that the roots were sticking out of the ground, and it literally looked like a giant hand just sticking out of the ground, kind of like thing. And he tucked me down there, and he had thrown moss and kicked leaves and dirt and all kinds of shit over me. And sorry about that. There we go. And it's like to me, it seemed like he was like leading them away from where I was at. And again, the ones that I had encountered the most were very protective of me. And that's why it would make sense, like seeing these people after all of this, and the familiarity of those creatures, like overall, I wasn't getting a bad feeling from either. So I don't know. It's really hard to describe, but it was very, very surreal. But yeah, as far as South Texas though, now South Texas, when I had first moved down there, there was a girl that had been missing. Now she had taken off with her boyfriend, and it was that kind of scenario. And but she had been missing for a good 2.5, close to 3 months. But despite our age difference, we look a lot alike. And ironically enough, her parents were military. So she had a military ID, and so did I. Now, my military ID was taken when I was 13. And of course, they were black and white. And hers had been taken recently. So she's like 13 or 14. And I was about 19 when I had moved down there. And or just about to be 19 when I moved down there. And I ended up, there's Ingleside, and then there's Ingleside on the Bay. And in between the two, there's this pretty thick forested area. Pretty thick forested area. That the side closest to closer to the Ingleside on the Bay, you'll see a lot of javelinas and stuff like that. It's also an oil field over there called sometimes those javelinas do make a lot of the similar sounds that I had heard before in North Texas. So with that in mind, it's kind of hard to tell in those woods and stuff like that. But eventually, like at some point, I was in the woods and just walking through there. Again, so it's called Live Oak Park, and it's this giant little, this good sized little park for disc golf and stuff like that. And some of these disc golf parts of the game and stuff like that, I don't know what they're called, but it's like the target where you're supposed to toss the disc at and stuff like that, and you're supposed to make it in the hoop or whatever. Some of those were like in the woods and stuff like that, but they had like marked trails to get to those. And there was several trails that I would go off of, and I would go off and explore the rest of the woods and stuff. Now, there were some really, really thick parts that were just too thick to get through. The brush was very pointy, or like pointy, very sharp. And there was really no walking through it. But there were animal trails running through there and stuff. There were plenty of deer that ran through there too. But usually walking through there, I would find the stuff that I would find there is what really got me. And very similar, again, the smell of wet dog out there. And then you would see like tufts of hair in certain parts of like the brush and stuff, the thicker part of the brush. You would see little tufts of hair, and the footprints were massive. And I remember I actually like tripped. It had rained really bad the year that I had moved down there and stuff. It had rained really bad. And the mud the mud had been really thick through there, and by the time it had already like dried up and stuff, these footprints were like very deep because of the mud and everything. And I actually like tripped over one of these footprints, and I mean, some people would say I have small hands, but like these were the size of these paw prints were way bigger than the palm of my hand. And the markings on the trees were very, very similar, except instead of crisscross, these were more just like slashed marks in the same direction, but over and over and over again. So like these overlapped scratch marks high up in the trees. And if you weren't looking up at these trees, you really wouldn't notice them. But you would definitely notice the smell. The closer you would get to certain areas, that smell would get very, very pungent. And there was one night I decided to walk through there, and it was I'd say it was about 10 o'clock or so. I decided to walk through there. I also learned that that's where the big population of the homeless people would hang out. But the homeless people, they knew better. So they knew what these markings were. They knew not to go to certain specific areas. And they actually talked to me, hey, don't go down that path. That's not safe. And I was like, what do you mean? And they pointed out what I had already seen before. They pointed out the scratch marks high up in the trees. And this one lady had pulled out this massive ball of hair that she had collected on some of these trails and stuff like that. And she explained their like migration pattern. Even she's like, yeah, a lot of times they will shift. They'll shift west during a certain part of the year, and they don't. They'll hunt the javelinas, but the bigger the javelinas, they will team up and like bulldoze you and stuff like that. They found there was a separate time that I was in those woods again at night, and another homeless person had actually scared the hell out of me and was like, "Hey, you want to come see something cool?" And I'm like, "No, not really." And sorry. And I'm trying to like be polite and walk away, and they're like, "No, don't go down that path. That's not safe." And the way this person had said it, I was just like, "Okay, I won't go down that path." And another person had come out, and they seemed a little more down to earth and maybe not on drugs. So they're like, "You got to see this. You have to see this." And I was just like, I guess. And at first it looked just like a big coyote and stuff like that from a distance. But getting closer to it, it was much larger, and it had been dead for a while. So like it had been picked at and whatnot, but its legs were clearly broken. And which typically, if you're in a javelina's territory and stuff like that, they will take your legs out from under you. So that we're assuming that's what had happened to whatever this thing was. And it's weird because like the face was different from what I had seen up in North Texas. This was a little bit more human like. The nose wasn't like a snout. It was more flat, and it had really large nose holes. But it had the same type of ears on the side of its head, and again, very hairy, and kind of muscular. These were you could see more like skin on them. Like if you know what a Zolo looks like, it kind of looks something similar to that, but there's like hair all over the place.
Okay, so describe for us what a Zolo is.
A Zolo is a type of dog. It's a Mexican breed. It's one of the most oldest dogs in the Americas. Pretty ancient, and they are typically hairless, and a lot of people believe that they are some people believe that they are like the chupacabra, and that attack livestock and children and all that stuff between Mexico and Texas and the southern states. But if you look at a lot of the pictures of Zolos, they look very similar to Anubis. But like I said, this creature, its snout it didn't really have much of a snout. Like it did have an elongated face, and the nose just it did have kind of like this animalistic nose. It almost looked like somebody stretched somebody's nostrils upwards and like scrunched it. But you could definitely see its teeth. And like I said, it had been dead for a good while.
Mm.
It didn't have any eyes, and a good part of its insides were missing and stuff like that. Is pretty shredded. And it looked like it at one point did have a tail. Something probably bit it off. But I remember looking at this thing and I don't know, I felt so like, I mean, I feel bad when I see animals like that, but at the same time it was a different kind of sad because it was just, again, there was some sort of familiarity to this. It was really sad to see for some reason. Just it hit kind of hard. And I left, and then years later I ended up having my old well, I had my daughter like shortly after I'd moved down there and stuff. And she was about 7 or 8 when she had her first encounter. And oh, go ahead. And hers was from a distance. So this is what she described to me. Her dad had left somewhere, and her grandma was upstairs asleep, and she wanted to come outside and play. And she had one of her little best friends would typically be next door on the weekends and stuff like that, and she wanted to go see if she could play outside and stuff like that. And so Ingleside on the Bay, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. So there's a highway, or it's like a 2-lane highway that comes up and it curves around, and it curves around Ingleside and stuff like that. And their house is like the first street right off of this highway and stuff like that, and it overlooks the Bay Area. Great fishing spot. It's also like a boating, like where you can launch your boat and stuff like that. And there's like a little field out there, and a little set of bathrooms and stuff. And so she had been playing outside with her little friend for a little bit, and for some reason her dad still hadn't gotten back, and it was already like nighttime and stuff like that, and she basically was refusing to go in. And she was, again, still just playing out front in the front yard. And it was already dark, and she's looking across into this open field. Now, it was before they did all the construction and put this like water, not really a tower, but it's like a water treatment like thing in front of, right across the street from them. But it was an open area, and she'd been looking out there, and she said she saw a black dog running in this field. And there's also, it's like a runoff water area over there. It's not really a pond or anything. It's just like a chunk of land that dips down and collects water and stuff like that when water rises and when it rains. And this big black dog thing comes over to that area, starts drinking water, and she goes back to playing. And she's laughing, and she's using her imagination and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, she hears this thing start running, and she looks over, and it is dead set on her. And at first, she's just thinking it's this big black dog. There's plenty of animals that a lot of people's animals get out and stuff like that, and they've come up to her no problem. But the closer it started getting, she's like, okay, that's really big. And she the closer it was getting, though, like, there was a sense of fear and urgency to get out of there. Like, I need to go inside right now. And she said, so we also have a big black dog, and when he runs through the yard and stuff like that, he sounds like a galloping horse in the sand. And that's how she described this, but it was much louder. And eventually she gets to the front door, though, and she's looking back, and this thing is right across the street, and it stops right by their mailbox. And what freaked her out was because it was on all fours when it was running at her. But as she's going, she's at the threshold of their front door, and she's still looking at it, and it stood up. And she goes, Mommy, this thing was so tall. And it started walking on its two legs across the street. And when one day when we were talking, and again, Anubis came up, and she's seen a picture of Anubis and what he like, not like a hieroglyph or anything like that, just some form of artwork of the Anubis and of what he would look like and stuff. She goes, Mom, that's what he looked like. And I was like, who? She goes, that big black dog that ran at me. That's what it looked like. And I was like, did he come in the yard? And she goes, no, he stood in the road, but he stood on his 2 feet. And I got scared, and I closed the door, and I locked the door. And my grandma wouldn't believe me. My dad wouldn't believe me. And they wouldn't let me call you. And and she tried telling my mom about it, her grandma about it. And of course, my mom like blows that off. And I started asking her, I was like, did you smell it? And she goes, it smelled like wet dog outside. And I was like, did you smell it while you were playing outside? And she goes, not at first, but I looked up and I see the dog over by the bathrooms and stuff. And she wasn't sure if it had come out of the bathrooms, but she said it was in that general direction. And there's a house that is right up. So there's a street that goes down across this opening too, and there's houses along that. And she said like I said, she wasn't sure if it came from either the bathroom, but in that general direction. And she was very upset for a good while that both grandmas didn't want, they just kind of like blew that off. And I told her it's fine. She would have dreams afterwards, and she would write stories and stuff like that. And it really threw her teachers off too, because like her writing style changed like very suddenly after all of this had happened. And so there's a level of trauma there from this experience, that it did affect her a little bit, as far as school goes. And her teacher, they were supposed to write a story and then do an illustration, and she wrote a story about this creature. And her teacher pulled me aside and she asked me about this, and she was like, yeah, this is supposed to be like a real story. And I go, this was a real story for her. This actually happened over at her dad's house. And so I kind of explained what she had told me, and the teacher, again, she kind of was just like, that's weird, and in disbelief, of course. And I was just like, well, that's what she saw, and I have my own experiences of these things happening, and I've seen some weird things around here too. So she just again, it was just people blowing it off and stuff, and not wanting to really listen to it at that point. And I cut it off at there. And my daughter had to basically rewrite a whole different story and stuff like that. And it was ridiculous, but I can totally relate.
So let me ask you a couple of questions.
Mhm.
So if somebody was to ask you to describe what a dogman looks like, what would you say?
Based from what I've seen, what we would typically think a werewolf looks like, but more human features to them. You know what? The one that I had seen, that the dead one that I had seen, if you remember the American Werewolf in London, just before he's like fully transformed into that werewolf creature, there's a point where like his snout is like mid form that they show from the side view.
Mm-hmm.
That's very, very, very close to what this head looked like, but there was it was like dark gray like skin. There was hair and stuff like that, but again, this thing had been dead for a while, so I mean, it could have lost a lot of hair for all we know. But that was like the best way I could describe that one. The ones that really, like, a lot of your werewolf movies that you see and stuff like that are very, very close to what I specifically had seen. But just again, there was more of a humanistic realism to their face, like that. Like, that's kind of hard to describe there. But again, like, it was the eyes,
Mm-hmm.
the eyes that were just so human-like, and their mannerisms. Ooh, the mannerisms. Again, those four people that I ran into had a lot of the same mannerisms as the four creatures I first encountered those couple of times. And how they stood up, how they again, the larger one with the green eyes, the guy, when he walked around the table, he there's a way that he walked that was very, very similar to how that big creature walked. And when he was walking from this, so he was walking around he was sitting in the corner of this table, and he had to walk around to come shake my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he walked was very similar to how how this creature had walked around the camp. And when he looked over in my direction as he is making his way to come shake my hand, was the same way the creature had done, looking at me walking around the camp. And the striking resemblance is just, again, surreal, and ugh, it, I just didn't get a bad feeling about it. And I think that's what I kind of struggle with here, is like, again, it's just so, it's unexplainable, but again, like, most of the time, it's so hard to describe. It's so hard to put in words. um but I think that's what I struggle with, is like, in most of these encounters and stuff like that, you hear more of attacks and stuff like that, whereas my case wasn't anything really like that. And what I believe to that this encounter was like, uh I don't know, it's just so hard to put into words right now.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Let me ask you this: since you brought up those 4 individuals,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Do you think that Dogman is a werewolf, or do you think that Dogman is a biological thing that is always this Dogman, or do you think both are happening at the same time?
I honestly feel like both are happening at the same time. So I do feel like there is a biological creature that's out there, that just naturally lives out in the wild somewhere, or all over. But at the same time, I do believe that there is, from what, based on what I had experienced, this more of the werewolf feature side of it, where it's more of like a shape-shifting type deal, because it was just too striking. And so Mr. Ballin had actually brought up a couple of different stories where people had encountered the same kind of creatures and stuff. And one of them really stuck with me for a while, because the man that he describes in his story had these striking orange eyes, just like this female did when I had initially met her.
Mhm.
And they follow, the 2 guys follow the tracks and stuff like that to this cabin in the woods. He was working at a mechanic shop and stuff like that. And they see him, that to avoid them, but he remembers the striking orange eyes.
Yeah, I know the story you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that really stuck with me for a good long time, when I first heard that one. And then there's another one up in, I believe he's either Maine or Rhode Island, one of those up, very, very up there states, where this couple, they end up getting this chunk of land, and there's like 5 of these creatures, and basically all night long they're like circling their property and stuff like that. And they describe some of the same feelings that I ended up getting right before I had my encounters, that sense of not being alone, again, that smell, and then just the sight of them when they stand up on their 2 legs, like, it's a little jarring. You're not
Are you talking
expecting.
about the Palmyra Wolfpack story in
I think
Palmyra,
so.
Maine?
Yeah, there we go. I believe it. I believe it is that one.
Okay.
Um, the, and again, it was all the same feelings and things I had kind of experienced as well. And again, like that jarring, when they stand up on their hind legs and they describe it as, whoa, like then the sheer size and then alone too is just off-putting. Yes, we know like wolves are a lot bigger than your typical dogs and stuff like that, but footprints that I had seen and stuff like that were just massive, and I'm just like, not quite the size of a bear footprint, but I mean, if you were to look at a large cat footprint, it's pretty close to some of those. I'm trying to think of what they're called. Not pumas, because those are small.
Mountain lion can get pretty big. Yeah. Puma or a mountain lion can get pretty big. But if you're looking like an African lion or a tiger or something like that, jaguar.
Some big ass feet right there. That's pretty much what these were.
Well, even a wolf. I mean, people don't understand exactly how big a wolf is until you see a wolf up close. A wolf up close is a pretty damn big canid. So, they're pretty big. One more question for you as we wrap stuff up, because we're coming up, we're a little past the hour, and we can always come back and we can do some more stories again. When you talked about the dens that you've encountered and stuff, could you kind of describe like the areas that you usually encounter those dens and what those dens look like?
Yes. So in the thicker part of the woods, is usually where I would see them, and they would be off of a slight, what are they called? Animal trail. And usually these trails would look like a deer trail or something not very big, like that you would have to know what it looks like if you out in the woods and stuff. But it's very small trail, and it's usually in the thicker parts of the woods and stuff. And like I said, the markings of the trees, the closer they are on the trees. So like if it's tree after tree after tree, if they're all marked up along this little animal trail, you're getting close to their, it's like walking up to their front door essentially. And they look like almost little huts in a way, or like it almost looks like they pile up a bunch of branches and twigs and stuff like that. Some people say that hunters use those. Hunters make those during hunting seasons and stuff like that. And at one point, being growing up watching Bear Grylls and stuff like that, he's made similar type of shelters and stuff like that out in the wild. But these, again, they're more deliberate. These are very deliberate, but they have like a burrow. They burrow down into the ground a good ways. And the closest I got to one, I'd say was maybe 20-30 feet. But you could, like, when you look into the entrance of this little, it almost looks like a little dome type deal, but you could actually like see down where they made this like burrow like thing underneath the little structure. And again, it's always the smell for me. You always smell that wet dog smell. Sometimes it smells like dog crap. But now that's something I noticed too. So as far as like the dog crap smell, you won't smell it right next to their homes and stuff like that. You'll actually smell that way before, a ways away before, like that saying, you don't crap in your own backyard and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a thing for them. Like they don't crap anywhere close to where they sleep. And I'm trying to think of what else. Some of them did have like little tufts of hair. You can tell when, just like a dog and stuff like that, you can tell when one's like shedding and stuff. You'll see more hair just like balled up in a pile and stuff like that. But it almost looks like they use that hair in some of them for like insulation. So in between the cracks of these twigs and branches and stuff like that, it looks like it was like deliberately stuck. The hair was deliberately like stuffed into it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's.
Would you say it was pretty near a water source?
Yes, actually, these were the ones, especially up in North Texas. Hickory Creek ran through there, so they were fairly close to a good water source there. And then on top of it, with the hills and stuff, certain these little dips in these hills would create like almost like a pocket, and in certain spots that would just collect water. So that would be another like fresh water source. So there was plenty of, but they were very close to Hickory Creek. Same with the across town. There was a creek that ran through that little section of woods over there. And most of their dens were a lot closer to that water source.
Okay. All right. Well, that's really interesting. I had been wondering about that, and I knew that you had a lot of firsthand, knowledge with dealing with that. So we are definitely going to have you back. I know you've got more stories that you've got to share with us, and you've got a lot of paranormal stuff that has gone on in your life that I definitely want you to share. So hang around for just a few minutes. I'm going to wrap this up, and then I want to talk to you for a minute before we say goodbye. So
already.
So all right. So 1 second. Hey, everybody. Thanks a whole lot for tuning in again to another episode of Monstrous, the podcast. We really appreciate you coming by and hanging out with us and hanging out and listening to Aleera. We're going to have her back again in the future. We had a whole lot of fun with her coming by and talking to us. And remember, lock your doors, lock your windows, check in the closet, check under the bed, because monsters are real and you never know when they're going to be back. Everybody have a great night. Take care.
Whispers in the twilight, darkness and a breeze. Shadows move in silence, mystery in the trees. Secrets in the